Moses has been summarizing sections from the book of Leviticus. So we talked about sacrifices in chapter 28 and feast days in chapter 29. And then you might remember that in the book of Leviticus, after those sections, we had a chapter that felt almost like it was tacked on the end a little bit. A chapter about vows made to God. Well, today, in Numbers chapter 30, Moses is summarizing that teaching. Now, why is this so important in the sight of God? Why does this require a separate little section for this odd chapter at the end of Leviticus? Well, the answer is because what we're really talking about here is honesty, integrity, and decency. And those things really do matter to God. Life is not just about sacrifices, family time, festivals. It's about how we live our lives, what we say with our lips. We worship a God who speaks and has given us the ability to speak. We worship a God who always keeps his promises and calls us to do the same. And so as we come to these vows now in chapter 30, it's worth reminding ourselves that nobody has to make one of these vows. As we saw back in the book of Leviticus, these are voluntary declarations. But if you make a vow, you must keep your vow. All of God's people should be truthful, honest people, full of integrity, who keep their promises. But there is something else going on in this chapter, isn't there? Something that perhaps doesn't sit well with many in our modern world, and it's a responsibility given particularly to men within the family. And not just men in general, but to husbands and fathers in the family. Now, again, we've talked about this before. Men and women are absolutely equal. They're both made in the image of God with equal dignity and value and worth. But since the very earliest pages in the Bible, it has been absolutely clear that men and women have different tasks, different responsibilities. And God, as the creator, has the right to decide that, doesn't he? Now, the particular responsibility that he gives to a husband and a father is to protect and provide for his family. Now, that doesn't rob the family members of their individual responsibilities, but it does put the overall responsibility upon the father. There are lots of places in our society where we see the same kind of dynamic crop up, don't we? And we're often glad of it, at least when it's working well. So parents have a responsibility for children, of course. Husbands have a responsibility for wives. Pastors have a responsibility for members. Government has a responsibility for the population. It might well be that if you're watching this video, you can think of somebody that you have a responsibility for. That doesn't rob them of their own responsibility for themselves, but you are supposed to be looking out for them. So we see here that if a man, verse 1, makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he must not break his word, but must do everything he said. Simple as that. And that should be the default way that we think about our promises, shouldn't it? We made a vow, we said we'd do something, and so we must do it. Keep your promises. However, there is an exception here, or a provision here, that if a young woman, verse 3, still living in her father's household, if she makes a vow to the Lord and the father hears about it, well, if he agrees with the vow, then fine, the daughter is indeed obligated. If he disagrees with the vow but says nothing about it, well, that's a dangerous category to be in, isn't it? We'll come back to that. Then again, the daughter is obligated. But if he hears the vow that his young daughter made and he disagrees with it, and you think you'd have to have a pretty strong disagreement for that to be the case, the father is able to protect his daughter by saying that vow doesn't bind you anymore. He's taking responsibility for her there. Likewise, if a wife makes a promise before having spoken to her husband about the given thing, and then when they have the opportunity to talk, the husband disagrees, he can nullify that vow. If he agrees, then they are bound to it. But again, if he disagrees but doesn't say so, then they are bound to it still. So there is a responsibility there for the husband and father in the family to see things accurately and speak up lovingly if things are going wrong, if they're heading in the wrong direction. Now think of Adam back at the tree in the Garden of Eden, and we read that he was with Eve while she ate that forbidden fruit. He didn't speak up when he ought to have done. He didn't stand up for truth when he ought to have done. He didn't step up to protect his wife from the error she was making. Here are some points of application for us. Firstly, if you've been given responsibility of any kind, It is your duty to wield that responsibility in a way that protects and provides for others. You don't have that position for the sake of your ego inflation. You have that position so that you may serve others well. Make those in your family glad that you are looking out for them. Secondly, we all have an individual responsibility to tell the truth and to live with integrity. Be careful about what you say you will do, because it reflects upon the God that you say you serve. And finally, in both of these instances, see how they find their fulfillment in Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He never lied, he never sinned, he never was deceptive or double-minded. He was full of integrity. And with all of the authority he had, he always used it for the good of others, not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. May we model our lives on that kind of love.